Hello, everybody, and a very good afternoon to you. I realized that my speech was intended to be started with a greeting of good morning, but we are now in the midst of a very serious problem because I'm in the way of your lunch. And thinking of food, I realized after having come back to India after an absence of 10 years, I'm reminded very strongly of how much I love curry and how much IP law in India is so similar to curry. It is a mix and a melting pot of so many things, so many issues, and so much flavor. And it is powerful because of what India represents and how much it can be a great influence to the rest of the world. So I am here a little bit, I think, astounded by the presentations I've seen in the last few days, realizing that perhaps what I intend to share is just a very, very little bit of what might not be of as much significance to what India represents to the world. But I hope with my sharing, I can at least impart some of the experience of a very focused little red dot on the face of the earth. And I hope that my sharing would allow new insights and perhaps a reference point from which further deliberations on how IP enforcement, litigation, and generally dispute resolution in other alternative forms like arbitration and mediation can pan out over the next few years in India and around the world. So thank you for listening to me. I hope I will speed up a little because I realize also I'm sitting at the bench there that there is a clock ticking in front of me and I'm already running out of time. So I realize that the topic today refers primarily to enforcement, but I feel that it's important to distinguish enforcement from dispute resolution. Many of us from an IP background will remember enforcement as our attempts to stop counterfeits, to stop people from copying, to basically forward the interests of IP owners. But as the world evolves, we also realize that sometimes it is not just a question of an IP owner against a copycat. It is balancing the interests of other stakeholders in the IP ecosystem. And as a result, disputes arises because of different interests. And we hear earlier about the very useful avenue of mediation as a means of balancing such interests and allowing parties with disparate views and concerns to come to a fair settlement that everyone can be satisfied about and walk away and continue to make money in business. So my focus really would be on dispute resolution rather than enforcement, which is rather narrow. And so with that in mind, I will hopefully give a little introduction. It's a very fast speed through of things to the legal and IP system in Singapore. This is barely only a few slides. Many of the people in the audience are IP experts and experts in litigation, in Indian law, and you will probably be aware that Singapore and India share some common ancestry in its legal systems. So this will be very quick. Following that, I will go a little bit deeper into some discussions about the various dispute resolution avenues available in Singapore. Generally criminal proceedings, largely with enforcement, administrative proceedings that you'll find at the registries, the Competition Commission, and various other government authorities, civil proceedings before the courts, arbitration, and mediation. So the brief history of Singapore, we're a very young country. We just recently celebrated our 50th year of existence. We were like India, part of the UK extended empire until World War II. we were occupied by the Japanese for a couple of years during World War II. I don't know much of the law during that time, if there was any law. But from 1945 onwards, there was a transition to self-government. Many things were put in place, including ultimately a constitution. And some might not be aware, Singapore was really a part of Malaysia for a couple of years until there was a disagreement at the upper levels of government, which led to Singapore's independence in 1965 when we became a republic. So we do have many similar legal traditions as India may have in terms of law and jurisprudence. For example, our penal code in Singapore was modeled largely after the Indian Penal Code and rather than English law. Okay, with that, I might want to introduce a short distraction so that you can understand how Singapore is like and the mentality of what we have. Now, probably the only other person in this room who might understand the first word here will be Ganesh, having been exposed to Singapore. But for the benefit of the rest of you, let me explain this esoteric term of Kiasuism to you. Kiasuism is an ism of Kiasu, and Kiasu is a transliteration of a Hokkien phrase, Hokkien being a dialect of Chinese, largely spoken in southern China, with some semblance to what Taiwanese people might speak on the ground. What it means, in a sort of a rough sort of way, suggests a fear of losing out. So this mentality that has existed in the Singapore environment ever since we became independent. We're a little red dot. Nobody cares about us. Everybody hates us. Everybody doesn't really pay much attention to us as a nation. Made Singapore and its population very concerned of losing out in the world. And that's pervaded into the way we view the world and the way we deal with everyday life. One of the things that came out of this concern of the fear of losing out has caused Singaporeans to strive for excellence. And that is presented in many aspects of our life. Singaporeans are hardworking. Indians are hardworking too. But Singaporeans recognize that being hardworking is very important. And one of the strange things that arose is Singapore is very, very conscious of rankings. It's always trying, as a government, as a country, to come up along good rankings for various kinds of things. Like, for example, recently there was an IP index that was launched indicating that Singapore was one of the top 1 or 2 countries in terms of IP system in the world. And that's been going on and on and on. The only thing that we've never really gotten much ranking in are Olympic Games. Basically, we're not very sports conscious, although that's trying to change. Now, another thing which is also very real in Singapore is we're always changing. And if anyone visits Singapore after a gap of 1 year, they might notice things that they remember from the past having disappeared from the face of the earth, because things get torn down, rebuilt very, very quickly. So there's a very strong construction industry. In fact, that's how I got into the legal practice in the first place. I was a construction lawyer when I first started. But then I realized, it's always constructing and it's always too busy. I was more interested in technology, so I moved into IP.